Parte uno. The day she disappeared. People say you don't forget trauma, but that's not exactly true. The truth is more complicated. You don't forget the moment, but you forget the minutes after. You forget the shape of the air, the sound of your own breathing, what you did with your hands. You remember the scream, but not how long it echoed. I remember the day my sister disappeared, like it's carved into my bones. It was a Wednesday. The sky was gray, but not stormy. The kind of cloud cover that makes everything feel suspended in time. We had just finished dinner, meatloaf and peas, and Dad was already 3 beers in. Mom was doing dishes in that mechanical way she always did them after they fought. Lots of clattering, no humming. Sara asked if she could go outside. I said no. I was 15, she was 9, and that meant I thought I was in charge. She rolled her eyes at me the way only a little sister can, then turned to Mom. Mom barely looked up. Bat by sunset. That was the last thing she ever said to her. Sara pulled on her yellow hoodie, the one with the frayed sleeves and a stain on the cuff from Kool-Aid, and ran outside barefoot. I didn't follow. I sat in the living room, playing Halo on mute, trying to drown out the fact that Dad had started yelling again. Something about bills, about the truck, about how Mom never listened. I turned up the volume on the old box fan instead. It covered the sound enough. The sun dipped lower, the sky turned orange, then red, then purple, and still no Sara. I remember glancing at the clock on the microwave. 8:42 p.m. That number would haunt me for the next decade. I stood up. I walked outside. The air was warm, but the kind of warm that clings to your skin. I called her name once, then again. No answer. Not even the sound of branches cracking or leaves shifting. No squirrel chatter. No bird song. Just silence. Then the woods swallowed it all. We lived on the edge of Crooked Ridge, a patch of dense forest at the southern edge of Boone County. There were no official trails, no park rangers, just trees, caves, and old paths made by deer or people who didn't want to be followed. Everyone in town had a story about those woods. Not all of them were the same. Some said people went missing because of the mines, unmarked shafts, at old explosions, bad maps. Others said the land was cursed. Old coal towns buried beneath mudslides, angry ghosts, strange light. Some even whispered about things older than people, things with names in Cherokee or older. But no one ever moved away. The land was too cheap, the rent too low, and people, no matter how afraid, always made excuses to stay. That night, we didn't call the sheriff until almost 10. Dad was drunk. Mom was numb. I screamed at both of them. Then I grabbed a flashlight and ran into the woods alone. I searched until dawn. Found nothing. No footprints. No broken branches. No torn cloth. Just trees. The kind that bend slightly toward you when you're not looking. I thought I heard her voice once, whispering my name, low, like the wind. I ran toward it. It stopped. I stood in the dark, flashlight flickering, screaming until my throat went raw. No one answered. They brought dogs the next day, the sheriff's team, volunteers, neighbors, nothing. They searched for 4 days, nothing. Then they brought in a specialist from Charleston, some kind of tracker. He said it was like she'd vanished mid-step. One moment there, next moment, gone. No sign of a struggle, no sign of anyone else. They asked me questions, lots of them. When did you last see her? What was she wearing? Was she upset? Did she say anything strange? I gave the same answers every time, until I started to wonder if they were true. What if she'd had said something strange? What if I had ignored it? What if this was my fault? They never found a body. No blood, No clothing, just silence. After a while, people stopped talking about her. Mom got quieter. Dad got meaner. I started walking the woods every night, listening, hoping. 3 months after she vanished, I heard her voice again. It was around midnight. I was sitting on the porch, staring into the tree line, and I heard it, clear as day. Luke, my name, in her voice, soft, pleading. I stood up so fast the chair fell over, ran down the steps barefoot, into the trees. "Where are you?" I screamed. No answer. I stood there for over an hour. The next day, I found scratches on my arms, deep ones, like brambles. But we didn't have brambles in that part of the yard. That was the beginning. The voice didn't come every night, but it came, sometimes faint, sometimes louder. Always the same, Luke, over and over. Let it run. At 3:12 a.m., I woke up to static. The tape had stopped. I rewound it, listened. Nothing. Then, just before the end, a whisper, very faint, hard to make out, but it was there, my name. The next morning, I hiked deeper, retraced the route I remembered, the one she used to take with her dolls, the one with the bent pine that looked like it was bowing. I found it again, still there, but older, cracked along the middle like something had struck it from inside. Behind it, a trail I didn't remember. Narrow, covered in moss, leading east. I followed it. After 20 minutes, I found the shoes. Tiny, children's, caked in dirt, half buried under leaves, yellow laces. I stopped breathing, picked them up slowly. No holes, still tied. I sat on a rock and cried for the first time in years. I kept going. The trail curved, then straightened, then opened into a clearing I'd never seen before. Rocks shaped in a circle, smoothed in the center, like people had sat there. On one of the stones was a mark, not carved, burned, a spiral. I reached out. It was warm. The sun started to drop fast. I checked my phone. No service. Of course. I turned back. Made it to camp before dark. Listened to the tape again. Nothing new. Just the same whisper. My name. But this time, after it, something else. A second voice. High-pitched. Urgent. A single word. Stop. That night, I dreamed of Sara, but not as she was. Older. Maybe 13. Wearing the red shirt I got her for her last birthday. She was standing at the edge of the clearing. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. Behind her, shadows. Tall, thin, antlered, watching. I woke up drenched in sweat. The recorder was running. I hadn't turned it on. It hissed in the dark, then clicked, then played back a voice. Clear this time. Her voice. Don't follow. Then static. Parte tres. The clearing. The next morning, I didn't pack up. I should have. Everything in me, every instinct honed by a decade of grief, guilt, and half-remembered nightmares, told me to leave. But I couldn't. Not after hearing her voice again. Not after the shoes. So I followed the mossy trail again. This time, earlier. The sun filtered through the canopy in fractured beams, lighting up dust motes that drifted like ash. It felt warmer than it should have been. Too still. No bird song. No wind. The clearing was waiting for me. Same spiral burned into stone. Same unnatural silence. I sat on the edge and waited. It didn't take long. Footsteps behind me. I turned fast, too fast, heart hammering in my chest. It wasn't Sara. It was a man, late 50s, maybe older. weathered, tall, but slightly hunched, wearing a forestry uniform with a faded badge. "Ranger Deaton," he said. I recognized the voice. He was the one who'd called me. He nodded at the spiral. "You found it." "What is it?" He sat on a rock across from me. "No one really knows. Locals used to call it the listening place." "Why?" He tapped the stone. Said the rocks remembered voices, that if you sat here long enough, you'd hear the woods speak. I swallowed hard. I heard my sister. "I figured," he said. "You're not the first." That stopped me. He took out a thermos, sipped. "There have been others. Kids, adults, hikers, folks that vanished in these woods. Some come back, most don't. But you said you heard her." He nodded. 2 nights ago. Sounded like she was just behind the trees. I shined my flashlight. Nothing, just mist. But the voice stayed, kept saying your name. I told him about the dream, about the shadow things, about the antlers. He didn't blink. "Woods have always had watchers," he said. "You ever hear of the Hollow Men?" "No, not men exactly, not beasts either. Stories say they guard the in-between places, the cracks where time thins." "The spiral?" "Maybe." He looked at me. "You want my advice? Go home." I laughed. Bitter. "I did that already." He stood. "If you hear her again, don't answer. That's how they get you." He left, just like that. Back into the trees. No sound of his steps, no branches breaking, just gone. I sat there for hours. The sun never moved. That was the first thing I noticed. I checked my watch, then my phone, both frozen at 3:17 p.m. I stood, backed away, and suddenly the sky shifted. The sun moved. Time resumed. I ran, didn't stop until I reached camp. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat by the fire and played the tape again. This time it was longer. Sarah's voice came through. Clearer, not just my name. Sentences. "Luke, they're not what they seem. Don't follow the white tree. It marks the loop." I rewound it, listened again. Same message. Again, same. Over and over. At dawn, I found the white tree. It wasn't hard. It was huge, towering. Its bark bone pale, almost glowing. It stood alone in a grove of dark pines, perfectly still. A circle of stones surrounded it. Similar to the spiral clearing, but rougher, broken, as if something had smashed them outward. At the base of the tree, another item. Sarah's bracelet. The plastic one with her name in little colorful beads. I picked it up. It was warm. And then I heard her voice. This time, not from the recorder, from the woods. "Luke." Soft, crying, close. I turned. There, about 20 yards away, stood a girl, wearing the red shirt. Hair a little longer. Same eyes, same face, older, exactly like in my dream. "Sarah?" She didn't answer, just looked at me, tears on her cheeks. "Come with me," she said. Parte 4. Through the loop. I didn't move at first. Just stood frozen, staring at her. My heart was beating so hard I thought it would break through my chest. "Sarah," I whispered again. She took a step closer. I could see the bracelet was missing from her wrist. The same one I'd found at the base of the white tree. She looked exactly like I remembered. But she shouldn't have. Not after 10 years. She should have been almost 20 now. But the girl standing in front of me wasn't more than 11 or 12. Frozen in time. "Sara," I said again, voice shaking. She flinched slightly, then turned and walked away. "Wait!" I ran after her. Branches slapped against my arms. Roots clawed at my boots. But I didn't stop. She was always just ahead, never looking back, until she reached the hollow. a place I'd never seen before. It was circular, sunken in the earth, like a bowl. The trees surrounding it grew at strange angles, twisted as if they'd been bent by something heavy pressing down from above. In the center stood a cabin, old, sagging, built from gray, worm-eaten logs. Its windows were black. Its door hung half open. Sara stood at the edge. She looked at me, eyes wide, then vanished inside. I followed. The air inside the cabin was colder than outside, much colder, like walking into a refrigerator. It smelled of rot and pine sap and something older, like paper turned to dust. There was no furniture, just a dirt floor and the spiral, not carved this time, painted, huge, covering the entire back wall, dark red, still wet. I turned around. Sara? No answer. Just the wind. Only there was no wind. There couldn't be. The trees outside didn't move. The air was dead. Then I saw the mirror. It stood in the corner, framed in wood as old as the house, fogged over. But something moved behind it. A shape. Tall, thin, wrong. I stepped closer. The fog cleared, and I saw myself. But not myself. A version of me. Eyes too wide. Smile too sharp. Mouth moving, but I couldn't hear the words. Then, the mirror cracked. A single line from top to bottom, and the room began to shake. I stumbled backward. The spiral shimmered, twisted, started to move. Not physically, visually, like my eyes couldn't hold on to it, like it was trying to slide out of view, but couldn't. Then a sound. Not a voice, a hum. Low, ancient. It vibrated in my chest. I dropped to my knees, hands pressed to the ground. The hum grew louder, and beneath it, a whisper. My name. Not from the room, from beneath it, from inside the earth. Then, footsteps. Behind me. I turned. Sara stood there, but not alone. The shadow things had come. Thin, tall, antlered. Black silhouettes against gray light. Their heads tilted sideways. No eyes, no mouths. But I knew they were watching. One stepped forward, reached for her. She didn't flinch, just looked at me. Her eyes pleading. "Help me," she said. I stood, grabbed her hand, but as soon as I did, the room snapped again. Not physically, chronologically. Time folded. Suddenly we were outside, but it wasn't the same day. The trees were greener, the sky brighter. Bird song returned, but the cabin was gone, and so was Sara. Parte 5, un raballo. I stood there for a long time, heart pounding, mouth dry, trying to make sense of what just happened. The clearing was the same, but not the same. The cabin was gone, not burned, not broken, just gone, like it had never existed. The white tree stood nearby again, only this time it looked younger. The branches hadn't yet split like claws. Its trunk was slimmer, its bark smoother. I turned around, slowly. Something had changed. The air, the light, the smell of the woods. It wasn't just a trick of the mind. I wasn't in the same time anymore. That thought hit me hard, because it meant I had crossed into the loop. I stumbled toward where my camp had been. No tent, no bag, no sign of me ever having been there. My boot prints in the soft dirt were the only proof I existed, and even they began to fade as I watched. I checked my phone. No signal. Date, April 17th, 2013. It was 2023 when I entered. I had gone backward 10 years, exactly the day Sara disappeared. I fell to my knees. The air was thick, like breathing syrup. My brain tried to deny it, tried to explain, sleepwalking, delusion, head injury. But my body knew, the same way it knows when you're being watched in an empty room. I needed answers, and there was only one place I knew to find them: home. I walked for hours. The trails were familiar again, but fresher, less overgrown. I saw things I hadn't seen in years. A mailbox with my last name still painted on it, a yellow toy truck, half buried in the yard, the porch light intact, the screen door whole. My chest tightened as I approached. The house looked exactly like it had on the day Sara vanished. Because it was. I stepped onto the porch. It creaked under my weight. Then the door opened, and my mother was standing there. She looked younger than I remembered, tired but alive in a way I hadn't seen since the day Sara went missing. She blinked at me, then gasped, "Luke?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. I looked past her into the living room. There I was, 15, slouched on the couch, controller in hand, halo on mute. My jaw dropped. I staggered backward. She looked between me and me, then did something I'll never forget. She reached out, touched my arm. "You found a way back," she whispered. I sat at the kitchen table, shaking. Mom brought tea. Her hands trembled. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Then she said, "This happened once before." I looked up. "What?" She stared out the window. Right after she disappeared, I started hearing voices, my own voice, telling me things I hadn't done yet. I thought I was going crazy. She looked at me again. But now I know. The woods, they bend, fold, trap. I asked her how to fix it. She said, "We don't fix it. We finish it." That night I watched my younger self argue with Sara. He told her not to go outside. She rolled her eyes, asked Mom instead, then walked out the door, just like before. Except this time I followed. Partesis finished the loop. I followed her at a distance. Her yellow hoodie flashed between the trees like a lighthouse in reverse, always blinking just as I got close. She took the same path, past the bent pine, toward the hollow. Only this time, I knew what was waiting, and I wasn't alone. As we neared the white tree, the air shifted again, heavier, colder. I saw the circle of broken stones, the faint shimmer of the spiral in the dirt. Sara hesitated at the edge of the clearing. She turned back. For a second, her eyes met mine. Recognition flickered, confusion, fear. Then a voice whispered, "Now." And the shadows came. 3 of them, tall, antlered, hollow, not quite there, not quite not. They moved through the trees like thoughts slipping through cracks in memory. One reached toward her, not fast, slow, patient, as if this had all happened before and would again. I screamed, ran forward, grabbed her hand, and the world split open. There was no sound, no light, just falling, like through layers of time, memories folding inside out. I saw every version of myself who had come before, some older, some younger, some broken, some vanished, all of them reaching for her, all of them failing, until now. When we landed, we were in the clearing again, but different. The spiral was gone, the cabin was dust, the white tree stood split and blackened. Sara was still holding my hand, still 9 years old. Still shaking, but alive. She looked at me. "Luke?" I pulled her into my arms and cried, really cried, for the first time in 10 years. We walked out of the woods together. The path was clear, no fog, no whispers. Birds were singing again. The sky was bright. And when we emerged from the trees, we were home. Present day. My car was parked by the driveway. The porch light was shattered again. But the door was open. Inside, Mom was waiting. Sara didn't age. Doctors couldn't explain it. No sign of malnourishment, no trauma markers. Just a girl missing for 10 years, returned exactly as she left. The town whispered, but no one had answers, and I didn't give any. Ranger Deaton came to visit. He brought a thermos and a photo. It showed the clearing, empty now. No spiral, no tree. It closed, he said. I nodded. I think she was the last piece. He looked at Sara, playing in the yard. Maybe so. Then he handed me a folded map, unmarked. No trails, no legend. Just trees. And a single word written in red ink near the bottom. Remember. Sometimes at night, I still hear them. Faint footsteps in the yard. The rustle of antlers through low branches. But they never come closer. The loop is closed. Sara is home. And the woods, for now, are quiet. The end.